Going. All right, everyone, welcome to Invoice Approvals and Vantagepoint. My name is Natasha and we have Mike presenting today. Just before we get started, I wanted to let you guys know in case there's some awareness or people who haven't been on a webinar before, I'll briefly shine some light on Rhodium Digital and what it is that we do before Mike's presentation. So Rhodium Digital is a technology advisory practice built to empower businesses with contemporary tools and processes. The goal is to help create streamlined, future resilient organizations who achieve a great return on their investment toward their systems and the processes that support those systems. We've been fortunate enough to partner with a range of well-recognized ERP vendors, and Deltek is one of them. Our team is very excited that Vantagepoint has reached maturity, leading to the opportunity to support so many growing A&E and similar project-based consultancies. Our team has supported hundreds of Deltek clients with services ranging from initial ERP implementation through to ongoing daily support and everything in between. If you have questions surrounding your ERP, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, as there's a very good chance we'll have supported other clients through similar situations. Now let's get right into what we're here to discuss, invoice approvals and Vantagepoint. Take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Natasha. Hello, everyone. So today, we're going to look at the full workflow of approving invoices from setup and configuration through starting the approval process as a biller in interactive and in batch billing, then how to approve or mark up these invoices as the project manager or the person approving the invoices, and how to finalize them. Then we also have a quick look at reporting. Just so you know, I'm going to go through a number of slides with screenshots in the beginning to kind of lay out how this works. And once we're done with this, I actually jump into the application to give you an overview of where things are. And at that point, you're more than welcome to ask any kind of questions while I'm in those screens. Okay, so let's get started. Setup and configuration. So for you to turn on invoice approval, you go to settings, billing, and options in the web client, and there select use invoice approvals to yes. Pick a default invoice approval process that is then assigned to each and every project that you mark to be approved. And also make sure to check the use markup in draft invoices. That lets you then draw into these PDF invoices for approval purposes. So this is a per company setting. So you would have to repeat this if you're in a multi-company environment for each of your companies. As you remember, when you selected the default invoice approval process, there's just a default in there that informs the project manager and the biller with these submits, approves, etc., etc. You can create your own. For that, you have to launch the desktop application, go to settings, billing, and invoice approval process, select or create a new one, and then define the following steps: submit, approve, reject, and unsubmit. So the action can be one of those 4 items. You can pick for approve or reject any employee field from the project hub, including custom fields. So if you have a custom setup where you have a specific invoice approver, you would add that custom field to the system and then assign it to your very custom approval process. You can pick the alert frequency. You can have 1 alert per invoice or 1 alert per session. Per session will send out 1 email or notification to the employee for all invoices processed in 1 single session. So when it comes to batch billing, you get 1 email. When it comes to interactive billing, once you finish the interactive billing process, then an email is sent. There's different alert types: email, notification center, or both. So you can pick one or the other, or you can have both ways. If you check the notification center summary as link, it links back to the invoice in invoice approvals or interactive billing, and I'll show you how that works. So once you've set up the generic information, you have to then enable invoice approvals for each and every project. So to do that, it's part of the billing terms. To do that, you go to the projects hub, pick the project you want to make part of the invoice approval process, select billing terms, and then select the enabled in invoice approvals in your sidebar, and then also pick the invoice approval process. You can make this part of the default billing terms so that this is filled out for any new project you create. So once that is all set up, we can start with the approval process. There's two ways of doing it, as I said, interactive and batch billing. In interactive, it's fairly straightforward. You select a project to invoice. You make sure invoice approval is enabled in billing terms. You prepare your draft as you would do before in Envision, in Vantagepoint. You modify, hold, write off items, make changes to the fee, percent complete, all that. Then you can preview the invoice with the print button. And now instead of accepting it, there is now a submit button instead. So when you click that submit button, that starts the approval process. When you click it, there will be a dialog box asking you for a final comment to the reviewer. You can type something in or simply click OK. And at that point, the invoice approver is informed of the new invoice to be approved and is coming into the process. Same is true for the batch billing, but here the only thing you have to do is basically select draft and submit, so that whenever you run the draft, it submits the approval request for all projects that have been set up with invoice approval. Other than that, it's the same as always in batch billing. Okay, so we set up the invoice, it's sent out to the PM, and now we can approve or reject it. So there's two ways of doing this. One is in the invoice approval screen. That is under billing invoice approvals. Here, you can see every single invoice related to you where you are part of the approving process, and you can see their status. So you see the project number, the project name, the company name, the currencies, if you have multi-currency turned on, the invoice amounts, the status, and any comment. For simple cases, you can simply write in there, select the row that you want to look at, and then hit approve or reject. It just shows you a quick dialog that you can enter your comments to this invoice, and then you can fire it off. If you need more details, you can then in here select open in draft invoices. What that does, it opens up the project screen and goes to the last tab that is now new, the draft invoice approvals. You can also go directly there, so you don't have to go through invoice approvals info center. You can go directly to projects hub and draft invoice approvals, same thing. So if you have set it to that you allow markup in PDF, the first page is that draft preview, and here you can highlight, add text, markup and whatnot right into the PDF, and I'll show you that in a second. Or you can then in the details tab hold, write off, or modify the details submitted for this invoice. So here you see how you can mark up the invoice. It allows you to highlight, annotate, draw a comment, and all annotations are stored with the approved or rejected PDF. So they're there for later review as long as you need them. If you want to modify it directly here as the PM, you want to write off or hold a couple items, you can do so in the labor expense units tab, and you can also make changes to the fee if you have the rights to do so. And then the changes can be accepted by the biller once you approve the invoice after you modified your items. Again, once you approve or reject, that dialog comes up with the draft invoice comments. Here you can enter a final comment for your approval or rejection. And then that is then sent back to the biller, and he can see your markups, he can see your comments, your drafts, your draft holds, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now, once you've done that job, it comes back to the biller, and now his job is to finalize the invoice. They can do so in batch billing, and then run simply the final process, which then will include all approved invoices with an invoice approval enabled. And in the include, you can actually see, I just want to run it for projects with approvals enabled, so you can actually run it in 2 batches if you want, as the batch billing process started. In interactive billing, same thing. You go back to the invoice, you look at the draft review here. It's a separate tab now in interactive billing. You can look at any kind of comments, annotations that the project manager did, modify the final invoice accordingly, and then basically accept the invoice. Or if you need more feedback from your project manager because you changed something and need a feedback to it, you can resubmit it at that process. If you need to start from scratch, you need to unsubmit it, and it kind of gets back to the starting point of the invoice approval. Then there's the reporting. In the invoice approval screen, you have that one report. If you click on the report itself, you will see that invoice approval report that you see to your right here, with the project number, the details, the submit status, etc., etc., etc. So you can actually run that from reporting as well, not just from the invoice approval screen. So that is a quick run through from a PowerPoint perspective. What we do now is I show you this in the application itself, and please feel free to have questions. If you type that in, if you type in your questions, Natasha will then let me know, and we can discuss that in detail. So first screen here, this is the general setting per company. You see here under billing settings, billing options, you have the ability to turn on print invoice approvals. You can pick the invoice approval process. And then, yeah, make sure that you use the markup in draft invoices. That's a new feature in the 4.5. So that's that. If you need your own invoice approval process, you can go into, oh, where is it? Sorry. Let me just end this. Oh, it doesn't show, but yeah, but it's in there in the client, in the smart client. You can set up who's gonna be informed about what. Then here in the projects hub, we have the billing terms, and as you can see here, you can enable or disable the invoice approvals, and then also pick one or a different approval process. So if you have, you can have multiple processes that inform different people for different invoice purposes. Then here in interactive billing, you can simply, I just did approve, so we have something to show, but you can see here, I can approve, submit, and unsubmit. That would resubmit the invoice if I made any changes in the meantime. So if you do make changes while it's still in a submitted status, you can resubmit it to include those changes into the document that is then reviewed by the PM. And how do I review that? Again, here in my invoice approvals, I have all my items coming up, and the one I just submitted is this here. I could print the invoice in here, I could comment on it, approve it, or reject it. Or I can go into the details here in the project hub under invoice approvals, and now have the ability to just draw in here if I want. I can highlight different colors. I can change the color if I want. I can underline. I can strike through if I need to. I can do this wavy thing, and I can put in complete comments here. So I can do is this correct? Just any kind of comment, or you can insert text right into the application itself. You can look at the general fees. You can go into labor and basically hold a couple things if you have the right to do so. Same for expenses and units. In fees, you can, again, if you have the rights, change the % complete. And once that's all done, you can approve this. It's a bit slow on, this is a test server, so it's not the fastest here. Once it's approved, you can go back to interactive billing and then continue with your process. So that brings us back to, so yeah, it's approved. So if I go back to invoicing here, and I've refreshed my screen. I can now see that the invoice has approved.
Hi, Mike. I've got one question that came in as well that just says, sorry, how is the invoice approved?
Oh, by simply, again, in here, either in my review here, I can approve it here. Like so, this is approved. In here, I can do the same thing by simply selecting a line item and then click approve here without actually reviewing it. I can do that as well. Once that's done, where's the invoice here? Once that's done, you see here that my changes came through to back to the invoice, where the biller can then accept the invoice and send out the final invoice to the client. That's
Perfect.
how.
And one more question came up, just which screen are you on that you're going so fast? I'd like to see that again. They weren't sure which screen.
So sorry. So this is the interactive billing screen. So just again, type interactive billing and you're right there. There is the invoice approvals under invoicing. There is now a new tab called invoice approvals. Can you still hear me fine? I'm saying low. Okay. Where you can again review and then actually dive into the draft invoice. And the detailed draft invoice is in the projects hub. There's a new tab here called draft invoices. If you have an open, sorry, let me just go here. If you have an open one, my apologies. You see a white exclamation mark right beside the approval, this new tab in projects that shows you in projects that there's something for you to be approved of. See this here? It's just a reminder that there's something for you to approve. You can go in and have a look at these details. So that's how you get to these approval screens. There's, again, I'll just go through it. There's the interactive billing has new features once you turn it on. Then you have the invoice approvals under billing. And then in the project hub, you have this new draft invoice approvals tab. Those are the 3 items added to the system once you activate invoice approvals. Do we have any additional questions right now, Natasha?
Not at this moment.
Okay, so some closing thoughts. An effective draft invoice approval process expedites your billing process. It gets the invoices out faster. You don't have to print out things anymore, run around in your office. It's all electronic. People can mark it up, actually change it on the fly without having to go back to the biller and do all these things. The biller initiates the process, and the PM submits the draft and finalizes it. The PMs have all the information at their fingertips. They don't need to print out reports anymore and have a ton of paperwork going around. It's all right there in the project hub for them to review and make sure that they bill out the correct amounts, the correct type of work, etc., etc., etc. And there is a history of approval. So there is actually, you can always go back and look at these approvals to make sure why that invoice was released in the first place. You should always test this in a sandbox environment, of course, before you put it into production. This also allows you to train your users with these new processes so they get familiar with it and get into the whole kind of workflow of getting these notifications and getting it all done. And we can definitely help you with getting that sorted out and set up and trained. So that's what we do for you, and where we are more than happy to help you with. Okay, that was in 20 minutes, a quick rundown of how you do interactive billing. I went through quite fast, just so we have some time to spend now on some Q&As. If there's if you want to deep dive on some of the issues, we can show you right in the application to make sure that you see how this actually works in tandem with all the settings.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. I actually do have one question coming through. It says, does this new invoice approval markup reside completely in Vantagepoint?
Yes, it does. So there's no longer any side applications or whatnot. It's all integrated, and it's all integrated into the web client. Other than that one setting you have to do for the workflow, there is no need to start the desktop app at all. It's all in the web client and can be done by the PM and the biller from anywhere where they have access to that cloud environment.
Okay, perfect. One other question is, does Deltek plan to add this functionality into Vision?
No, there will be no new features in Vision. It's all just Vantagepoint.
Okay, another one is, how do we see the approved invoices and interactive billing? Is there something that flags an approved invoice?
Yes. So if you go back here to the screens, here in interactive billing. So this changes here. So as you can see here, if you submit it, the button here says, if you also can approve, it says approve. If you can just submit and accept, it will be grayed out. And then if it's approved, this button changes to accept. And also here in the draft invoice information, you see approved by and the draft comment. So you see right on the first page what status this invoice is in.
Okay, perfect. One other question. It says, if you change the amount on the invoice, is that new amount reflected on any reports? I would like to see total amount invoice, and I think reports only show original amounts.
So for those to show up, you actually have to then accept the invoice. So this is just a draft, meaning it's not set in stone yet. It needs to be approved for that to actually hit the books. So this is just between the biller and the PM at that status. But once the biller accepts that new amount, yes, it's shown on all the invoice, on all the reports.
Gotcha. So another one we have is, in Vantagepoint, we plan for our PMs to only interact with the browser-based interface rather than the old Vision interface. They won't need to access the old interface, will they?
No, for PMs. So there is only a handful of items left in the desktop application, and none of them is PM related. It is just, there's some strange settings you basically touch once and purchase, and not purchase order, asset management is still there, and no PM uses asset management. So a PM and a regular employee will work exclusively in the web.
Okay, one other question. It says, I don't think reports show the new amounts. I know project details does not reflect the changes.
No, it doesn't. Again, it only shows once it's been accepted. So while you're in the approval process, the changes do not show yet. It has to be accepted as an invoice for it to reflect on those reports.
Perfect. I think we've got one more question. I think you mentioned it in your presentation, but it says it looks as though historical markups stay in the system and can be referenced in the future. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that is correct, yes. So it keeps a history of all your markups, even if you unsubmit and resubmit it, it's still there.
Okay, I've got another one here that says, even once the invoice is approved, project details does not change.
You like you mean the cost? Of course, the cost won't change. It's the invoice amount that has been billed. So we would have to have that conversation, but you have to understand that in interactive billing, the only thing you change is what is billed out to the client. You can't change what has been costed, other than you going in and do a modify. So the only thing that is reflected on a cost report is if you do a transfer here. That is the only thing that actually has an effect on the cost side of things. Everything else, bill, hold, write off, and modify, is just a interactive billing extension, especially modify or adding new labors. It's just reflected in the invoice that goes to the client, because we do not change and cannot change the cost from once it's been accepted. It's just a bill out feature at that point. But I'm more than happy to have that discussion offline to kind of guide you how that reflects overall in costing and billing.
Okay, one other question. It says, so can you see a total of what has been billed out to the client?
In invoice history, yes, here. So you see here the invoice. You don't see the amounts, but in project review here, you always see the amounts invoiced for that project. So up here, if we go, if you see the financials, you see the billed amounts here coming through, including the revenue and so on and so on. So that's here. And here in the invoices tab, you see the invoices with the totals. You see that as well. If you want to have the details per invoice, it's in the invoices tab now of the projects hub.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. I don't see any other questions in our box. I think we've gone through and answered them all.
Perfect. Glad we could. And again, if you have more detailed questions, please feel free to send us an email and we can reach out to you and go through a bit more in detail on those calls. No problem at all.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks very much for the presentation, Mike. And thanks everybody for joining us. And we hope to see you on the next webinar in the new year.